in the armed forces during the Second World War by James W. Peacock, Staff Sergeant, Company B, 121st Infantry, 30th Division, National Guard. And as soon as we went into the regular Army, we were transferred to the 8th Division. I was inducted into the Army from the National Guard on September 16, 1940. I was 20 years old. I went to Fort Jackson, South Carolina for Special Forces training. Fort Jackson is located near Columbia, South Carolina. We started a training program almost immediately. And we started a cadre program within a month. A cadre is where you take officers and men and non-coms from a trained unit, and you make another unit out of with draftees until you have a complete unit. Then you take the draftees into the unit that you were in, and you promote men out of the unit to non-coms and officers, and then you add the draftees to it, and then you have 2 units from one. We started getting draftees at this time, and they were split up among the 8th, 30th, 77th, and 80th Division. Non-coms were promoted out of what was left over. I was made a corporal. Officers were sent to OCS. They were called 90-day wonders, but not to their faces. We were in a mess until we got everybody trained for the new position. The reason we call them 90-day wonders is because they only got 90 days training to make them an officer, but they knew all about the Army up until that time, so they were probably pretty good officers, second lieutenants at least. Cadres for the 77th and 80th Division were 1,280 men each. Cadres of 200 officers were cut out for the 7th Corps. In the spring of 1941, we went on an exercise of 2 weeks to Camp Forest, Tennessee. A camp has nothing but some tents with wooden floors, and in cold weather they have a stove. There were tents on each side of a company street, and at the head of the company street was a command tent. And in this, of course, the captain did not stay, but all of the officers of the day and all the business were carried on there. And the non-com of the day stayed there. Sick call was held there, and some other stuff was taken care of there, and you applied for pass there. Mail call was held there, and sick call was held there. And squad leaders and platoon leaders were called there to be issued orders. And the end of 2 weeks, we came back to Fort Jackson, South Carolina. Everybody was paid at the end of the month, and most everybody was given a pass unless you had done something to warrant you not getting one at that particular time. I came home with somebody, whoever had a car, and it was about a 4-hour ride home, and for $5 I could ride home and then ride back to camp. I used a road with the Miller brothers. They lived near Yatesville, and they would put me out. I lived on the way, and then when they started to go back to camp, they would pick me up, and we would come back to Fort Jackson. We began to train again. Around Fort Jackson, there was a lot of sand, and it was hilly. Sand piled up. We marched a lot with light packs. Sometimes we would stay out overnight on a bivouac, and then we would carry full field equipment because we'd have to make our own bed at night. A full field pack had a shelter half and a change of clothes, and 3 pairs of socks, 1 blanket, and 1/2 of the squad had a shovel, 1/2 had a pick mallet, 1 rifle, 1 bayonet, 1 cartridge belt full of ammo, a mess kit, a canteen full of water, and this weighed about 40 pounds. And the canteen fit into its cup, which was hung on the belt. And if we were going to be out for any length of time, we'd have a slit trench for a bathroom. And when you left an area, it had to be policed up perfectly. Everything that you had bought there had to be carried away or buried. And we did a lot of firing on the range to train the recruits. We taught them everything we knew. And we taught them how to address officers. And that was very necessary because an officer is what trains you and tells you what should be done and how it should be done. And he gives orders and he expects them to be carried out. If not, then you have no discipline in the Army, and you've got to have discipline to make it an Army. And we taught them how to clean rifles, and taught them how to salute, and clean equipment, how to make beds, how to fold clothes, and how to store them in foot lockers. When we went to eat, you took your mess kit, fork, and spoon, and cup with you when you went to the mess hall. When you finished eating, you went by 3 large cans, and 2 of them were full of water, and 1 of them was for garbage. That was the first one. And we emptied the garbage in it and waited till we could get everything that was out. Then took the hot soapy can next, and there were brushes hanging on the sides. And you scrubbed your mess kit real good, as the best you could. Next was a can of hot, clean water, and you rinsed it good. And this was emptied real often and changed. A man was standing there to watch you and to inspect it when you got through. And any man that did not clean his up real good was put on KP, kitchen police. Because if you didn't clean your canteen or your mess kit up real good, you could get dysentery. And nobody wanted that. They put you on KP for a week. Our clothes were washed for us, except for our socks. You did them yourself, and you put your name, rank, and serial number on everything that you had, except your rifle and bayonet and your socks. And that was the reason you kept your socks and did them yourself. The war with Japan had broken out by this time, and the Germans were threatening the Atlantic coastline. The 8th Division was stationed along the coast from Florida to Maine or somewhere up there. I never knew exactly where. But my platoon was stationed in South Carolina. We were very near the Little River on the Outer Banks. And we guarded the bridge at Little River. It raised and lowered to let ships through. And we had a unit of artillery with us. We slept in pup tents. Pup tent is the 2-man tent. You know, I mentioned shelter halves before. And that's what you made the pup tent out of. And we had a sub come up, and he was probably 5 or 6 miles out. He fired around a shell. We couldn't tell whose sub it was, but apparently it was not ours. And the artillery fired back at him, 375 millimeter shells. Nobody hit anything, and they took off. I guess they left for good. It was winter time, and sometime it was about 45 degrees. Needless to say, we were glad when our time was up. We had no boots, where we had shoes, but a boot comes up almost to your knee. We had been brought out by trucks, and all our food and water was brought out to us, and the mess tents were located on an island somewhere inland from us. We never knew where. At the end of 2 weeks, we were replaced by another platoon, and we went back to Fort Jackson. It was still winter and cold. We got 7 days leave when we got back, and we of course had to clean up all of our gear, and we cleaned up our clothes, and everything we had was cleaned and put away. And then we got 5 days off to go back home, and we stayed there and really enjoyed that 5 days too. We went back to Fort Jackson and got leave pretty often to go into Columbia. We always had a good time there because there was so much to do. There were the stores. We did a lot of window shopping, didn't have too much money, but we went in shops and cafes, and most of the time we ate, and we did a lot of things there that you could do without money. We trained our draftees in rifle marksmanship and taught them to throw hand grenades. For those who do not know, you use the same motion you do for throwing a ball, except you lob it. You pull the pin, count to 3, and lob, not straight like a ball, but kind of over. And when you release it, you keep going until you're flat on the ground. And that way you kind of protect yourself in case it goes off. Of course, these grenades did not go off, but we were practicing that they would go off, so you could learn how. And you wanted it to go off in the air. It's more effective that way. You had to learn to do that by counting and throwing until you got the distance you could throw and the count just right for it to go off about 6 foot above the ground. We taught them to pack a full field pack and to adjust the sling on their rifles, to stack arms, because you couldn't lay your rifle down on the ground. If you got sand in it, you went on extra duty. And sometime in April of 1943, we went back to Camp Forest, Tennessee, and began to train night maneuvers in the woods around the camp. And we'd go out at sundown and come back about 12 or 1 o'clock. And we still had reveille at 5 o'clock or sometime close to that in the morning. And needless to say, a lot of the men would go on sick call that morning. But you had to be fairly certain you were sick, or pretty soon they'd get used to that, and you call them wolf, and they'd put you on some kind of extra duty. We had to have a stove in the tent because it was still pretty cold. And after 2 weeks in Camp Forest, we went back to Fort Jackson. We trained in live fire, exercised, and you crawl under barbed wire, and sometimes you crawl on your back under that barbed wire so that you are looking up, and sometimes you crawl on your stomach, but you're never supposed to raise up enough to where that wire will touch you. Bayonet practice against a dummy hanging from a post, a crossbar really, with a dummy on each end of the bar, and it turns. and you go after a dummy on one end, and if you hit him and don't stick the bayonet in him, then the dummy from the other will hit you on the back. So you learn pretty quick to how that works. And we climbed over an 8-foot high wood fence with a rope on the side. We were climbing up so we could pull ourselves up. But on the other side, you had to jump that 8 foot down. And you had to learn how to hit and not break a leg. We run across the 30-foot long wood pole, about 10 inches in diameter. And if you fell off, you go back and start over. And we went back to Fort Jackson and were told to load all our clothes into barracks bags and turn in our footlockers. Well, we knew then we were leaving Fort Jackson for good, and we were not likely to be back. Because we had seen other people do the same thing when the captors came in. From December 1942 until March 1943, we stayed at Fort Leonard Wood, Missouri. It was on the Missouri River near Kansas City, Missouri. This was the coldest place I had ever been in. The snow was about 2 foot deep, and it was near 0 degrees at night. There was a path around the mess hall, and the path between each building. So around the mess hall, though, all of the men were coming from the various buildings, and there needed to be a path all the way around it, and there's several doors to where you would enter into it. But you did have to go to one end of it to get your food, and you got in line to get that. The rooms were warm, and the buildings and roomy, and the mess hall had a large stove, and I think they had probably several. I don't remember exactly how many they did have, but we went into the mess hall, and we had large stoves there, and just how many I still am not certain. All the buildings had stoves to heat them, and everywhere we went, we had a canteen. And a canteen is nothing more than just a little store. They call them on base here in the United States a PX. And over there, or when you're out on maneuvering or doing some duty outside, they call them canteens. And all the stuff we needed was in there. There was candy, cigarettes, tobacco, and socks, and underwear. We were taught German and French languages, and at some time we were getting recruits. I got a German, John Eck, and a Frenchman, Mitchell Dozart, in my squad. I was really glad to have them because I knew that when we got into Europe that we had not learned to speak their language good enough that we could ask where the bathroom was and where to go get food and the various things that we would need to know. They were just phrases, but we didn't have that good luck with them. And that was to be a part of we were to be a part of the invasion force, I was certain. One afternoon, we went out in the trucks for a bivouac, that is an overnight stay, and as soon as we had pitched tents, it started snowing. And we got supper and got in our tents fully clothed, and then we pulled off our shoes, and the snow was coming down harder and harder, and it was getting colder and colder. Some of them said it got down to about 15 degrees that night, and I believed them because it was terrible when we woke up the next morning and put on our shoes and unfastened the shelter half. We nearly froze right there. it slowed us in, and we got up to have breakfast. It was almost, we almost froze. The mess trucks brought our food, and the food, I guess the food was prepared back at Fort Leonard Wood and brought out to us. And most of the food was just about froze. The trucks had the side that let down, and they served you on that. And they had lines at each side serving off those doors. And the serving table on each side where they served us there. The officers and the medics got together, and they called for trucks to come out after us. And we went back into Fort Leonard Wood. A lot of the men had frostbite, and their fingers were cold. They really didn't know what they did have, but they had a sick call to take them in and fix them up. We did not go out again until it was warmed up. We studied maps and languages, and took our weapons apart and put them back together again and cleaned them, and we did that so we could do it blindfolded, and we could do it in the dark too. We studied the coast of England and the coast of France, and where we were likely to land, although we did not know where we might land, and I don't think they did either, as we found out afterwards. We knew it like the back of our hand anyway, so we were ready for it when we got there. We got everything together, and in March of 1943, we went to Camp Lagoon, Arizona. It was on the edge of the Yuma Desert, and we spent a lot of time. I think it was 6 months. It was hot and it was dry, but I had never been in a desert before, so it was interesting for a while, but it got kind of old real quick. And about 10 miles from the Colorado River, I guess, and not too far from Old Mexico. But needless to say, they would not allow us to go into Old Mexico. Probably the language barrier, more than likely. But it was a long way, and they didn't want us that far away from the camp. It was like most of the camps. It had 2 Lister bags in the company street, and the Lister bag has 6 spigots around the bottom. It holds about 50 gallons of water, and the temperature at night was about 40 or 50 degrees, and you need a blanket, and in the daytime it got up to about 100 degrees or more. The Lister bag hangs on a tripod, and it's made of canvas, and the wind blows over it and keeps the water cool, providing the wind is fairly cool. But the wind got hot during the day, and then it didn't keep anything cool. We could fill our canteens from it, and the water was just too hot for anything up during the afternoon when it got over 100 degrees. We got leave about 2 times a month, and there was nowhere to go except to Yuma, Arizona, which was nearby, about 6 or 8 miles, and we could go there. They had small buildings that they had 4 or 5 tables in them, and they gambled on them. They called it a cantina or a casino. I had always heard of casinos, but I'd never heard of cantina. I had never been in a gambling casino before, and all we could do was watch, but we didn't have enough money to gamble with. The only gambling that they were doing was with silver dollars. We played penny ante back at the camp, and that's all we could afford. That's all the money we had anyway. We had exercise and live fire, and then we started throwing live grenades. Well, out there in the desert, there was nothing around us, no trees or anything. So if we could throw a live grenade 30 yards away and we fell down in a ditch, we were not going to get hurt. And then we fired a bazooka, and we'd never fired a bazooka before, and that was real interesting. It takes two men to fire one. One man is a loader and one man aims it. And the loader shoves a shell in it, and it has fins on it, and it has two wires which he hooks up to a little old battery pack, and that's the way it's fired. The man who is going to fire it, when you tap him on the shoulder, you get out from in behind him right quick, because when he pulls the trigger and puts the electricity to those two wires, then it takes off. And we did a lot of hiking in the heat, and it would take the starch out of you right quick. We'd have the salt coming out of our shirts, and they'd get plumb stiff enough they could stand up by themselves, really. And they were washed for us. I never did find out where they got the water from, but chances are they probably got it from the Colorado River, more than likely. I never did know. The division completed desert training and returned to Camp Forest, Tennessee. We began preparing to go overseas. In November, we began moving to Camp Kilmer, New Jersey. We were split up into units that would go in the same ship. And the ship I went on was a small ship that held about 750 men, and I'm pretty certain they said it had been a cattle ship before, but they had cleaned it up real good, so it was okay. On December 5th, 1943, we got a pass to go to New York. I'd never been there before. And we went by train and got off at Penn Station, a nastier place you've never seen. We rode in a taxi down 42nd Street, and he put us out where we asked him to, and it was a lot of buildings and stores and places, shows and things like that. We didn't go into any of them, but we shopped along the sidewalk looking. And we called another taxi to come back and get us early the next morning. And he took us back to Pennsylvania Station. We spent the rest of the night there sleeping on the benches. There were a lot of homeless people there. And they took up most of the space, but they wouldn't say anything. If you nudged them over, they'd just move over, and we'd lay down there with them. I don't think the place had ever been cleaned up, and that was probably the reason. That was my first taste of New York. We went back to Camp Kilmer and began the next morning, began loading our ship sometime during the day. And we joined the convoy in the New York harbor. We gathered outside the harbor, past the Statue of Liberty, and when all the ships were in place, we started kind of circling. I guess we just circled around out there. You couldn't tell what you were doing because everything looked the same when you're out on the water. But finally, we started moving across, and we were a lot of ships. I don't remember how many, but I think it was about 30 or more. And they told us we were taking the northern route. I and most of the men with me were seasick all the way across. That was terrible weather. It was rough, and one storm after another. It took 11 days to cross. We had destroyers circling around us all the time, probably to keep the enemy from shelling us or sinking us with torpedoes. And but there was still some firing, and it might have been the ships practicing or cleaning weapons or just generally firing off. Anyway, we got to Belfast Harbor in Northern Ireland, and we unloaded into trucks, and we went by Eli Lodge and Dumcross Estates in Enniskillen, and that was in County Fingermile. So the 1st Battalion, 121st Infantry, were stationed at Shadow Camp in Fintona, and later at Ballynorfa in Dungannon, while the rest of the regiment were sent to Ashbrook and Colesbrook. That was the property of Sir Basil Brooke. Other elements occupied the surrounding territory and approximately 30 square miles. That was in January 1944. And it was not too cold, I guess about 45 degrees, but it was wet, and it rained an awful lot during that time. The wind was blowing all the time, and water had to be trucked in 10-gallon milk cans, and we slept in squad tents about in a camp, about like the other camps we had been in, and it was already pitched and for us. We didn't have to do anything when we got there except just be assigned to a tent. And we had the Lister bags in the street, same as all camps we had been in. And the kitchens apparently were some distance away. We couldn't see them, but our food was brought to us during the morning and noon and night. We had latrines, but due to the fact this was flat area out there and you could see for miles, we had set up a tent over the latrines where nobody could see you while you were in it and while you went to the bathroom. And we shopped in Belfast for some of the gifts that we sent home. They had to be small gifts. You couldn't send anything very large home. On water duty, and I was helping to unload water cans and take them to the Lister bags located in Company Street. And one of my men was on one side, and I was on the other side. He let go of his side, or it slipped out of his hand, and I'm not absolutely sure which. But I could not hold the entire can up because it weighed about 80 pounds, or maybe a little more than that. And I just held on it and let it go down as slow as I could. But I couldn't do it very decently, so it hit my right foot and broke my right great toe. They sent me to England, but all they did was just bandage it up and sent me right back to a hospital near Belfast, Ireland. I stayed there until I could walk, which was not too awful long, but they wanted to be certain that I would be ready to where I could go along with the invasion force. And they sent me back to my unit in Northern Ireland when I was in fairly good shape, and I could walk pretty good. Ireland was limited to small units. There was a lot of scouting and patrolling and a lot of night work. We didn't have a lot of room because you could get into these bogs that they had that were full of peat bogs, I believe they called them. And they cut this peat up and used it for heating. And so when they would cut the peat out of a bog, it usually was about 6 or 8 foot deep, so that left a pretty good sized patch of water there. And there was a lot of scouting and patrolling and a lot of night work, a lot of physical exercise, firing of all kinds. And Florence Court and Kellerwick combat ranges were used a lot. We could fire on them without any danger of hitting anything because that was such open country that we didn't even worry. We used the Gorton long-distance range, and now that was where you knew exactly how far it was to your target. And if it was $1,000, then you had to adjust the sights on your weapon to the 1,000 yards, and then maybe you'd hit it. At St. George Point, we were trained in anti-aircraft fire, and they pulled a target across in front of us, and this was at St. George Point. We were looking out over the ocean, so there was no danger of hitting anything because we were firing up, and the rounds would go a pretty good piece. And they pulled a target across the ocean in front of us, and we fired at it. Maybe we hit it, maybe we didn't. We never knew because they would go back and take that target off, but they didn't tell us how we did. At Mayo, we were trained to fire against a fortified position. We fired rifle grenades, bazookas, and we set explosives. And that's one of the things were taught right there, to set explosives to blow a wall down. Needless to say, we never did get the wall blown down, but I suppose we did all right because they let us get away with it. General Eisenhower, in one of his infrequent visits, visited the division in April on one of his many tours. I did not see him, and I guess he was with some of the other men, probably with some of the officers. General Patton, who was, I guess, my favorite general, inspected the 8th Division, and he watched us attack a fortified position at Mayer, and he talked to us a little bit. He walked around amongst us. And the 1st Battalion, 121st Infantry, staged an attack on the Steve Bly Range, and he watched us do that. And later at Castle Cole, he addressed the unit. And a lot of us got talked to him. Every 2 weeks while we were in Ireland, we sent 75 men and some officers to the 55th Division, which was a British unit, and they sent the same amount back to us. This was an exchange which was supposed to familiarize us with their methods, and then they would be familiar with our methods, because we were going to be fighting side by side when we went over across the pond. And this was worked out by the military, and as the invasion drew near, the training was expanded to larger units. A lot of combat exercises and a lot of hand-to-hand combat, and a lot of close-in combat. We studied German tactics and German and French languages, and we had training loading and unloading out of a troop ship into landing craft, and that is different from anything we had ever done, because a landing craft is shifting back and forth and bumping against the side of the ship, and the ship is shifting back and forth, and there's a lot of movement going on there, and you're trying to climb up and down a rope ladder, and it's not an easy thing to do. Several weeks before leaving for France, we had a dry run. Embarkation and breaking landings. It caught us completely by surprise, and we did not know it was only an exercise until after it was over. We studied landmine placement and anti-personnel mines, and we studied one that was a bouncing Betty, they called it. It would jump up when you stepped on it or messed with it, about 4 foot high, and then explode. And it was terribly dangerous. We loaded 4 troop ships in Belfast Harbor and were joined by 12 motor transport ships. We left the Belfast Harbor for the continent of Europe, we thought, on July the 1st. But we didn't go immediately. We began circling out off of the landing, the Red Beach, I believe, and they were still fighting there. And then we found out right quickly that was not where we were supposed to be. And we finally ended up landing at the beach of Omaha, which was where we were supposed to be, 24 days after the invasion. But we were supposed to circle and be that long getting there. At Omaha Beachhead was the Omaha Beachhead was on the Cherbourg Peninsula. We marched inland to Monteburg. The beach had been gone over with a bulldozer, and to a certain extent was in pretty good shape, and they knocked a gap in the bank that was back about 100 yards off the beach, and where we could drive our vehicles through there and carry our equipment through. And we marched into Monteburg, and we began final preparations for battle. We began a night march of about 5 miles, about midnight, and we arrived on a hill overlooking La Haye-de-Puy. We relieved the 101st Airborne Division. They had been there since D-Day, and they'd lost a lot of their men, probably about half of their unit, killed and wounded, and they agreed to stay that night and the next day and to indoctrinate us in what we were supposed to do there. And they pulled up and left the next night. And we got their foxholes and their trenches, and the hill where we were was about 60 feet above the town. And about 500 yards from the village. Now the village was in a valley, and they were about the same rise in the hill on the other side as there was on our side. And there was a road running straight through the bottom of it, and then there was one road that took off right across from us that went north. And we were supposed to fire at those people and that we saw, and so we did, and that was really not quite the thing to do. We had been told to shoot at everything that moved, and we found out that that was a big mistake. When we fired on them, they let us have it with everything they had. They fired mortars at us pretty often, and these were apparently fired from behind some buildings away from us, we fired mortars back, and we fired our weapons back at them. Then they began firing a 20 millimeter cannon from a tank at us. It was an 88, I'm pretty sure. And he was hitting the top of the hill, so we were not in any great danger. Our artillery was stationed back about a mile behind us, and they fired at him, and pretty quick they stopped him. I don't know if they hit him or not, but anyway, he quit. And we fired back and forth with each other for a few days, and a few of the men were hit. I didn't know of anybody being killed. Probably there was, though. One morning, our fire was not returned at all, and we didn't see anybody moving around. So the company commander ordered a patrol to go down and reconnoiter the town to see what was down there. And he said, be sure and don't go in any of the buildings, and don't move anything you see on the ground, and don't pick up anything, because they're all booby trapped. We were ordered to go after them, and we were also ordered not to touch anything on the ground or go in any of the buildings. Just don't fool with them. And we reached the town, and were told it was full of booby traps, and we started to follow the road that went straight across from where we were located on the side of the hill. Late the next afternoon, we came to the Eye River and dug in for the night. We sent out patrols to see what was on the other side, to see if there were any of the Germans over there. But apparently they hid or withdrew until the next morning, and then we started to cross the river and did not get far before they started firing at us. We were stopped on the north bank, a couple hundred yards after we reached the north bank, and then made a counterattack. And during the night, we had to stop there and dig in. During the night, the reserve battalion went through our lines, and they stopped them. And we went through the reserve battalion's lines, and we were moving pretty good, and they counterattacked again. But this time they had lost so many of their men, we just ran over them and captured a good many, and we just kept going. The men we captured were sent back with some of our men who had been wounded, and they went back to a barbed wire fence that was back there where we kept the captured people, and they were firing at everything they had at us. A tank moved up to a hedgerow, not really a hedgerow, but more or less a rock fence, and there was a gate there, and he started firing right down our lines. And all we had were rifle grenades, which they finally stopped the tank, but a lot of us were wounded meantime. I was wounded in the left foot with an armor-piercing round that went through my foot and stuck in my shoe. And 12 of the walking wounded started back to the aid station. And at the aid station, we were picked up by a jeep and arrived back at a field hospital. A field hospital is just a few large tents put together, but they have operating tables, and they have where you can sit down, and they have cots, and so it was not too bad. It was easily movable because they moved out a lot. They took the shell out of my foot, and while they were taking it out, they gave me shots, awful pain and shock for infection, and they sprinkled sulfur powder all over my foot, and that's supposed to further keep down infection. And they wrapped it where I could walk to a truck, and they loaded us, there was a truckload, and took us back to a hospital outside of Paris, France. I stayed there for some little while, a period anyway, and when it was alone and when I was healed and could walk on a crutch, they told us we were going to a chateau for recuperation. And the buildings had been hit several times, but they had repaired them to where they didn't rain in them, and they were somewhat available for where they were not in too bad a shape. Needless to say, we wanted to get back to the front. They wanted us to get back. We didn't want to get back. And we headed back as soon as possible. So when we could walk and were healed up fairly well, we were loaded onto a truck and sent back to Bastogne, Belgium. But this was before the battle for Bastogne, Belgium had started. And we stayed there for a few days, and then when they sent a truck back with supplies to our unit, we were loaded on it and sent back. And I was kind of glad to get back to Company B because I didn't know anybody else over there. And they were dug in on the river between Belgium and Germany. And the German army was on one side and us on the other side. And as it snowed, and it snowed pretty often, but it was not too awful cold. And they had dug large holes and covered them with branches and shelter hats where it didn't snow right in on them. But there was water in the bottom of the hole, so it was not too comfortable. We did our fighting across the river with artillery, mortars, and of course we did a lot of firing back and forth and reconnoitering their positions at night, sent patrols across the river, and some of us ran into one another, and it was pretty much hand-to-hand combat when that happened. Nobody got hurt real bad with it, though, because they wouldn't fire because it was dark and you couldn't see exactly where everybody was, so it was best not to fire unless you had the rifle right against the fellow in front of you. And we began to fight with everything we had because the breakthrough to Bastogne was we were right in the edge of it. And it was snowing almost every day. We had been ordered to cut the gap the enemy had made, and so it was pretty much hand-to-hand fighting, and until we kind of broke through and cut them off, or at least we got to where we could see everything, and we fired at everything except the tanks that were coming in. There were ditches on each side of the road where we were, and we fought back and forth across the ditch. We threw grenades until they finally moved back, or whatever we not hit moved back. And I had been hit in the hand, but it was not that bad. It bled a little bit. And the medic looked at it and said, when the fighting around slowed down, I could go back to the aid station. Well, it never did slow down. During the drive through the Hertigan Forest, they started firing airburst at us. This was a shell that would go off about 100 feet in the air, and shrapnel would just go everywhere. and you could not hardly get away from it. And you were lucky if you didn't get hit when you were under an airburst. I and two more men walked back to the aid station. Our medic was hit also, and he walked back with us. And when we got back to the aid station, they said that I had a broken arm and would send me back to a rear hospital, which was a field hospital. The field hospital, of course, was the several tents, but they operated on me and took the shrapnel out of my arm, but that was in my elbow, they said would not bother me, so they would not take it out, and said that would come later. The next hospital was near Normandy in France, and they looked at it and said the piece in my elbow would not give me any problem, and they would have to go through an artery, so they didn't want to do that. And they said if it gave me any trouble, I would be operated on later on. They said I would be sent home, and I was wounded on December the 6th in 1944. And they put me on the hospital ship after they had bandaged up my arm, but on the hospital ship, they put a cast on it. And the cast was from the tip of my fingers to my shoulder. And during the last of December, I guess it was, when the hospital was finally fully loaded, and we were told to get ready, we were fixing to come back to the States. It was the Queen Navy, and it had been converted to a hospital ship. While we were still in the harbor, I started running high fever, and they cut the cast off my arm and put my arm in a bath of Upson salts water. We had been at sea for about 2 days. They said I had jungle rot, a dermatitis infection that you get in the South Pacific. And I hadn't been in the South Pacific, so I don't know where I got it. We were coming back across the Atlantic, and we came, it took 4 days, and we came fast. We came back to New York Harbor and back to the Statue of Liberty, and they picked us up there and took us to a landing, and we were picked up there by trucks, and some of them went, of course, in ambulances, but those that could went in trucks. And we went to Howland General Hospital in New York City. I was allowed to call home, and I stayed there for about 1 week. And then they gave me a 30-day leave to go back to the Daytona Beach in Convalescent Hospital, called the Welch Convalescent Hospital in Daytona Beach. And I stayed there for 6 months. And my wife and son could come down to visit me, and I had a place for them to stay. So they stayed probably for 3-4 weeks. And I could get off at night and go stay with them. And I learned to do everything left-handed. Played softball and bowling and hardball and fished. I like to fish, so that was pretty nice. They rented, or maybe they owned the thing, I don't know, a barge, which was it would hold about 60 men standing around the side, and we went out and fished a lot. we would stay out almost all the day. And you had to sign up to be able to go out on it, because I think everybody wanted to go out on that thing. After about 6 months was up, I went to Fort Gordon in Georgia and was discharged there. They gave me $100 out of my $300 mustering out pay and $8.95 traveling pay. This was on July the 28th, 1945. I was awarded the Purple Heart for the wounds I had received, and I got 2 oak leaf clusters for having 3 wounds. And I got the European Service Medal, which was for going to Europe, and Good Conduct Medal. I don't know why they gave me that. And the American Defense Medal, and Infantry Badge, and Combat Infantry Badge, and Normandy Combat Badge, and Rhineland Campaign Badge, which was for, and this was all the badges that I had received while I was in the European Theater of Operations overseas, and I believe me, I had earned every one of them. There was not a one, with the exception probably of the Good Conduct Medal, that I hadn't done something to deserve it. The Good Conduct Medal was given because you didn't get any trouble while you were there, and you didn't get too much demerit while you were in the States and while you were overseas. And I kind of enjoyed my tour of duty over there, if it had not been for being wounded and had not been for the miserable conditions that we were in. But this was something that we had to do, and so I didn't really mind it when I thought of the fact that I had to go over there and fight to keep the Germans from coming back to the States and maybe occupying the United States. And I had no wish to have that to happen, because my family and everyone that I knew and loved were over here, and I wanted to keep the Germans away from them if it was humanly possible, so that they would not be in any danger. So for that reason, I was willing to go ahead and fight for them. And this is the end of my tour in the Army of the United States and the fight overseas. And I think that all of our men would be coming home right shortly after I was, because the war was actually over in 1945 when I came back from Welch Convalescent Hospital in Daytona Beach, Florida. And thank you for listening to this.